We are right now headed into what could possibly be the most significant election in the history of our nation. There have been many questions and much speculation concerning the role of God's people in the events that are transpiring about us today. And this study we're going to begin today on the role and relationship of God's people with their governments will hopefully clarify some of these issues. You see, God's word declares that we are to be submissive to governmental powers, yet many are bewildered as to why or how this could even be. But the answer is simple. It is because it is God himself that sets up these powers and takes them down, as the following scriptures are going to reveal. Whether you like an individual or not is not the issue. Whether he's a good man or a bad woman or whoever is not the issue. The issue is that God puts them in these positions. And we're going to see some very interesting Bible verses here as we begin today. First of all, in Romans 13, the first two verses there from our scripture reading. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is what? No power but of God. That means all of them, even the ones we haven't liked in the past, or even maybe the ones we don't like in the present. They're only there because of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Now here's the warning. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resist the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves what? That's a pretty strong warning, isn't it? Very strong warning here. This is very emphatic. This is not a suggestion, but why is this the case? Why does God tell us this? Well, again, if we look in our Bibles, Daniel 2:20, these are verses you're going to know very well. And keep in mind, all of those Bible verses we're going to look at, and some that I'm just going to refer to, will be in your bulletin or in your bulletin. But Daniel 2:20 says this, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Chapter 4 of Daniel says it this way, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men. Wow is right. What does the word base mean? Pardon me? Horrible, terrible, corrupt, bad people. Can you imagine God setting bad people up? Well, he's done it in the past, and he'll probably continue to do it in the future. But it is God that does it, and he has a reason for it. And who are we to question God as to why he would or would not use a particular individual? Still here, notice now in Jeremiah, it says, I have made the earth, the man, and the beast that are upon the ground. By my great power and by my outstretched arms, I have given it unto whom it seemed meet to Joe. To me. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with him. He goes on, and now have I given all these lands under the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Now, was Nebuchadnezzar a good Christian man? Was he a good Jewish man? He was a pagan, wasn't he? He was a corrupt man, wasn't he? And he says, I've given it to Nebuchadnezzar, my what? You mean God has servants who are pagans? That might be a foreign thought for some of us. God's servants are those that God worked his will out through. And beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him, and all nations shall serve him. Now notice this, his son, who's that? Come on, history class. No, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar's father. Given it, they'll serve him, that is Nebuchadnezzar, his son, Nabopolassar, and his son's son, Belshazzar, until the very time of his land come, and then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him. And it shall come to pass that the nation and kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I what? Punish, saith the Lord. Now, you know, to me, one of the more despicable of those kings was Belshazzar. He's the one that made a mockery in the banquet hall. But God says, I'm putting these three there. I will be with them until their time is up. And then he's going to move it on to other kings. And then came the Medes and the Persians. God was in control, friends. Our history of the past, of the world, is not haphazard. And the history of this nation is not haphazard. This was established as one nation under God. God is in control. It's just sometimes some of God's servants don't do what they're supposed to do, and when they don't, God will deal with his own servants. It's not for us. Another one here from the book of Jeremiah. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, because you have not heard my words, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land. One final one before we move on. I say unto them, and say unto them, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will send and take Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and will set his throne upon these stones that I have hid, and he shall spread his royal pavilion over them. You see, these passages, friends, make it very clear that God is the judge, and he puts down one and he sets up another, as it says in Psalm 75. Therefore, we are to submit to these higher powers, or these governments, for they have been ordained of God, and those who refuse to be subject to them shall receive of themselves, it said, damnation. They will be punished. Now, contrary to what many believe today, the phrase resisteth the ordinance of God is not referring to any law. It does not refer to law at all. You know, often man's laws contradict God's law. And what is being addressed here is not laws, but rulers. All throughout this, it's dealing with the rulers. Nothing is mentioned about any law whatsoever. Consider a parallel passage here now from Peter. Peter says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king. Now notice this, what are these ordinances? Whether it be to the king as supreme, or to the governor as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. So God sends these kings and governors and other powers to us, and he tells us to submit to each one of them, whether they're kings or governors or city council, or you know, there's a lot of bad guys out there, yes. But God says they're there only because I allow them to be there. They are to serve me. If they don't serve him properly, he'll take care of that. And here's what he says, for so is what? The will of God. It's God's will that we do these things, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. You know, some use or try to use this to support the erroneous theory that Christians are to obey all the laws of the land, whether good or bad. That's insane. Others say, well, we're to obey all the laws unless they disagree with God's law. Neither of these is correct contextually with what we're looking at. Yes, it's a given that we do not obey man over God. The Bible's clear on that. But remember, we're not looking at laws, but rulers. Much of the problem arises from the false assumption that ordinance means law. It actually means creation. Every creation, or ordinance as it's used here, has been ordained by God. And what are these creations? Well, it's clear. They are the kings and the governors and the various rulers, nothing whatsoever referring to laws, but only rulers or governments. The Apostle Paul's counsel to Titus was this: put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Here is a warning, my friends, a very clear warning, particularly in today's society. Here is a warning against riots and rebellion and insurrection. No Christian should ever take part in any of those things that have happened in the past, that are going on now, or that shall go on in the future, because it is going to go on. We're not to be a part of that. Since it's God who sets up and takes down these powers, when an individual seeks to remove one that God has set up, he or she is assuming the very prerogative of God. I don't like what God's done, I'm going to change that. And they set out with all kinds of evil ways to bring that about. And if this is true in the secular world, how much more so in the church? Was Saul a good man or a bad man when it came to David and Israel? Well, yeah, if you're going to try to kill somebody, you can be considered a bad man. He was out to kill David, and David could have killed Saul. And David, you will not find where David spoke bad against the king, and when he could have killed him in the cave, he didn't do it. I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. If God has put somebody in a position, don't lift your hand against them. If they do something wrong, you can sure speak out against the wrong, but don't attack the person. There are several ways that God can remove someone from an office in the church or in the world. All of these I've witnessed over the years. You probably have. One way is by death. You know, in the case of such rulers as King Saul, or even King Herod. Now, that was a bad guy. By death. Another way is through illness, such as with Nebuchadnezzar. God took him out of the way for 7 years, you see. But God was still in control. A third means is by separation, as is illustrated by Gabriel's declaration. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. But when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Greece shall come. So God can pull himself away and let that guy be overtaken by another way. And then, of course, a fourth way is a method that God uses to accomplish his will is through the voice of his people. Or in our case today, in an election process. In Romans 13 again, I want us to take a look at verses 3 and onward. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, that is the ruler, is the minister of God to thee for good. God put them there to do us good. They don't always do that, but God put them there for that purpose. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Without these powers, friends, what we have is something called anarchy. It goes on and says here in the next couple of verses, wherefore you must needs be subject. You must needs, what does that mean? Give me a modern way of saying that now. It is necessary, wherefore it's necessary to be subject, not only for wrath, also for conscience sake. I was teasing somebody earlier this morning about have they had their conscience seared as with a hot iron? You see, don't go against the conscience. God's Spirit speaks through that. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. In other words, he's saying if you do not want to fear the power, do not oppose the power, do not break the rules or regulations set down by the powers, because he is a minister of God. So regardless of how bad or how corrupt a power may be, they are all better than anarchy. And we are commanded to render, therefore, to all their dues. As we look and watch the news anymore today, I don't know which side you like the best, but I just don't really think that we ought to be involved in the anarchical movements of burning places and tearing them down and destroying other people's property, killing other people, running over them, hospitalizing them, going into restaurants and knocking things off of it. That is not a Christian. That is not the Spirit of Christ. But that is the result of anarchy, and it can get worse and very possibly may. You see, very familiar passages of Scripture contain a much overlooked warning. Watch this. This is from Peter. The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. But chiefly, watch this, this has just jumped out to me this week. But chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and do what? That had never clicked until this week with me. Chiefly those that are despising government. Presumptuous are they, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries. Many have failed to understand that among those to be punished for sin are those who have despised governments. God says that's a sin. Those who have spoken evil of those that God has set up. So in light of the inspired counsel that we have, we must each one make up our own mind after individual consideration of the issues of our relationship and our role in the government, whether it's city, county, state, or national. This must be done in light of our own study of inspiration. Our view in regard to public affairs must be molded by biblical principles and our understanding of prophecy and by our philosophy of history. You received a handout today that shows that we are faced with some various issues. This is here just for you to study the issues. Most people don't know what the issues are today. You study that through yourself and find out where you stand on these various issues and do it intelligently and in the light of inspiration. Our view in regard to public affairs must be molded by that. Notice this right here. From the humblest lot, those whom he has seen faithful have in time past been called to witness for him in the world's highest places. I want us to grasp this, because what we're looking at here is going to show us that what we're dealing with does not only pertain to us, but to our children. God's purpose for our children is wider and deeper and higher than our restricted vision has comprehended. World's highest places, watch this. And many a lad of today, growing up as did Daniel in his Judean home, studying God's word and his works, and learning the lessons of faithful service, will yet stand in legislative assemblies, in halls of justice, or in royal courts as a witness to the King of Kings. That's today. Multitudes will be called to a wider ministry, and yet we try to restrict them. Remember Joseph? You know, Joseph was a governor over the entire land of Egypt, second in command of all of Egypt. Nehemiah was a governor. Daniel was a great man and ruler over the whole province of Babylon and of all of the wise men of Babylon. Even today, many of our youth may be called to participate in public affairs. Notice again, counsel. Dear youth, what is the aim and purpose of your life? Are you ambitious for education that you may have a name and position in the world? Have you thoughts that you dare not express, that you may one day stand upon the summit of intellectual greatness, and that you may sit in deliberative and legislative councils and help to enact laws for the nation? Wow. You ever think about that? Youth, any youth here today, you have those ideas, cling to them. God may be calling you to something, because God went on and said, there is nothing wrong in these aspirations. If God's calling you to do it, do it. But make sure you're following God's calling there. Something that was very humorous to me, still is, when my oldest grandson was in the 8th grade. They took a 8th grade trip. Was it 8th grade or 12th grade? 12th grade. He was in 12th grade. Took a trip to Washington, D.C. And they went to the White House, and he's got all of his schoolmates there with him and everything. He's standing in the White House, and he looks around to his classmates and says, in 20 years, this will be my house. He had some aspirations. He still does to some extent. He's still looking in that direction, but it must be if God's calling you that way. Is there anything, you know, our own people complain that Brother Ben Carson, our good doctor, being complained and criticized and berated because he was running for president. Some of our own people in our church that were in our church before were criticizing him, condemning him, and even taking things out of context from his writings. I had to address this from Virginia, some of you may remember, and go back and reread Ben's stuff to show he was being misrepresented. The devil will attack any that God may seek to use to help further his kingdom, whether in the political realm or any other. One should not hasten to the conclusion, however, that it is God's design to promote his kingdom today by servants seeking public office. That's never been God's plan. However, historically, he has used some in this way, and God's people cannot fully ignore the public aspects of life. We must pay attention to public affairs and understand our role in these matters. Some people today, you know, even object to national symbols. That is to say, they take offense at the display of the American flag. Years ago, I was pastoring in the Chicago area, and I came into the church sanctuary one day, and there was a guest speaker up there speaking, and he was just pointing over. They don't even have the flags up here, but we had flags in our churches. And he pointed to the American flag and said, get that I forgot what he called that one. He called it some derogatory term, out of the sanctuary. And then he pointed to the Christian flag and says, and get that pagan symbol of Constantine out of here. I don't know who he thought he was to come into God's house to do that. He wasn't even a member of that church. In her book, Historical Sketches, Ellen White gives an account of a public meeting in the capital of Norway in 1886. And this is what she says. An American flag was placed as a canopy above the pulpit. This was an attention which I highly appreciated. See a contrast? My friends, we are not Jehovah's Witnesses. We are dedicated Christians. We are loyal to our country, regardless of origin, a people committed to the Constitution and to the laws of the land. We must let all people understand that. God has stressed that the Christian's duty is to render respect and reasonable service to his or to her own nation. And Seventh-day Adventists should always be alert, loyal, and willing and intelligent citizens of the country in which he or she does belong. We will recognize the claims even of Caesar, so long as they do not limit freedom in religious activity or impede the free exercise of the dictates of the individual conscience. Jesus said very clearly, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. We've got to understand that. And these two things have to operate together. And when one, that is Caesar, seeks to overrule God, then there becomes a great rift. Notice this statement. Teach the people to conform in all things to the laws of their state when they can do so without conflicting with the law of God. This is important that we understand this. Personal study of government and its relation to religion is especially essential today. Again, we have been told the people of God will recognize human government as an ordinance of divine appointment and will teach obedience to it as a sacred duty within its legitimate sphere, which means when it isn't contradicting the law of God. We are to recognize this, and it is a sacred duty to follow this. The banner of truth and religious liberty. Notice both are there. Some today try to separate one from the other. They want to dwell only on Sunday laws or whatever. But the banner of truth and religious liberty has in this last conflict been committed to who? That's us, okay? And we can appreciate these truths only as we search them out by personal study. You see how clear instruction is. This includes all the people of God, indicating, bear with me a minute, throw nothing at me yet, indicating that even Seventh-day Adventist women should take an intelligent interest in public affairs. Here's an insightful thing on women and politics. There are speculations as to women's rights and duties in regard to voting. Many are in no way disciplined to understand the bearing of important questions. But watch. Such women are not prepared to intelligently take a prominent position in political matters. Let this order of things be what? There it is. Should women take a position in political matters? That's what she says. If they can intelligently do so, they must know what they're talking about. They must know what they're voting for. And by the way, that applies to men as well. The conclusion here might be drawn: it's appropriate for women and men as well to exercise their duties in regard to voting if they have been disciplined to understand the bearing of important questions. Otherwise, no. And second, that such an understanding and intelligence should be acquired by all. We must be intelligently informed of the issues that surround us, or we can't speak or have a voice on these things. Never should anyone vote or not vote for a particular person based upon the candidate's looks. Some of you can remember, I know many people told me in elections of many years past, "Oh, but he's such a good-looking guy. How could you vote for anybody else?" Oh, yeah. That woman is not prepared intelligently to say anything. Others, you should not vote or not vote for a person based on their personality. "Oh, he's such a charismatic person." So what? I think the most charismatic being that you'll find is a guy named Lucifer. Not based on their charisma, not based on their race. Too many people do that. You know, or their religion. Deal with something here for just a minute. I want to go back to Brother Ben. You know, some Adventists condemned him because he was in the political race, and others were voting for him simply because he was black, and others voted for him simply because he was what? A Seventh-day Adventist. All three of those are wrong. That's no reason to vote for anybody. You don't vote for someone because of their gender. Not long ago, there's been a couple of them trying to run just because I'm going to be the first woman president. Have some intelligence. You don't vote based on looks or personality, charisma, race, gender, or even because you like or dislike that individual. That doesn't play into it. Your likes and dislikes. Not only is such an action ludicrous, it's also sinful, because it's contrary to all inspired counsel and thus is in blatant opposition to God himself. Furthermore, we must not only vote intelligently, but we must never become partisan. It is a mistake for you to link your interest with any political party, to cast your vote with them or for them. You cannot vote for a particular party. You look at what those people in those parties stand for, what they're going to bring about. You make your decision on that. I just get so tired. I've got a very dear, close relative friend of mine keeps sending out these things. He doesn't send them to me. He sends because he knows I will talk back to him. But he sends them out on his Facebook to friends and relatives that get it back to me. And all he says is, "Vote blue." How stupid. If you hear this, my brother, please forgive me. But it's true. It's true. You cannot. If voting, we must remain free and independent, and none should ever vote a party ticket without analyzing the individual candidates and where they stand on the various issues. The attitude of my party is seen to be foreign to the intelligent Seventh-day Adventists and is in direct rejection of inspired counsel. As such, we cannot with safety take part in any party alliance or political manipulations. The Lord would have his people bury political questions We cannot with safety vote for political parties, for we do not know whom we are voting for. We cannot with safety take part in any political schemes. We cannot labor to please men who will use their influence to repress religious liberty and to set in operation oppressive measures to lead or compel their fellow men to keep Sunday as the Sabbath. The people of God are not to vote to place such men in office, for when they do this, they are partakers with them of the sins which they commit while in office. Powerful, isn't it? This statement, though, is explicitly forbidding involvement in political questions or political parties, or knowingly supporting or voting for an individual who would repress religious liberty or seek to institute Sunday laws, is so often distorted to mean we become partakers of any sin they commit while they're in office. This position requires a tremendous departure from both the intent and the very language of this statement, as well as the denial of clear Bible doctrine. These verses you should know well. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The Son shall not bear the iniquity of the Father, neither shall the Father bear the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. You are not responsible for the sins of another person, with a couple of exceptions. Everyone's responsible for their own sin. You become responsible only when you choose to partake of that sin. Notice this. It is inevitable that children should suffer from the consequences of parental wrongdoing, but they are not punished for the parent's guilt except as they participate in their sins. We all bear consequences, but there is no guilt of sin that we don't choose to partake of. Notice again, to just such an extent as he, that is Eli, permitted or excused sin in his children, did he become a partaker in their guilt. What caused him to become a partaker? He permitted it and he excused it. You do that, you become a partaker of it. This is what we must come to understand from Scripture. And so, as can be seen, we become partakers of the sins of others by condoning them, by refusing to oppose or condemn them, by our silence and inactivity. And this can be summarized in the words of the Apostle James, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. As such, the warning that we become partakers with them in their sins, which they commit while in office, must be understood in the sense of seeking to place someone in office. Now, this is important. Place them in office, knowing that they will seek to enact laws to restrict religious freedom, to place someone in office who will enact laws to destroy the sanctity of marriage, to enact laws to promote intemperance, or to encourage immorality, or to destroy the unborn. You seek to put those people in office by vote or silence. You become partakers with them of those sins. Is it possible that refraining from seeking to prevent such individuals from obtaining office, that we become partakers of their sins by our silence, by our refusal to engage? I believe that close to 100%, no 100%, what 90% of our people, if there was an issue on the ballot for a Sunday legislation, 90% would probably go vote against it. Why won't they do the same thing when there's an issue on the ballot to kill a baby up till the moment and even after it's born? Why will they not vote to try and stop the immorality, the homosexuality, the same-sex marriages? It's just an interesting question to ponder. I believe it's primarily singular. One, they will vote against that Sunday law because it'll have an impact on them. The others doesn't really impact them. We'll just leave that stuff alone. If you have religious convictions in any area, and we'll see this in just a moment here, I'm going to take a little longer today because I'm trying to do 4 sessions in 2. So I'm going to need another 10 minutes here. Being partakers with them of the sins has no application, by the way, to their personal lives, nor to the political issues. Forget the politics and consider the platform pertaining to the principles of righteousness. Not that these people are righteous, but will their governance tend to preserve righteous principles? This is evidenced by the following. Those who by their votes sanction the liquor traffic will be held accountable for the wickedness that is done by those who are under the influence of strong drink. Now that's quite powerful. By voting to sanction liquor traffic, today we can even put drugs, marijuana, and all the rest of those in with it. Those things just weren't used back then, but the liquor traffic will be held accountable, not just for the wickedness of the guys that authorize this stuff in offices, but for those who do bad things while under the influence of that drink. You see how far that can go? Again, we are to oppose Sunday laws by pen and what? Vote. Not riots and insurrections, by the way. I do hope that the trumpet will give a certain sound in regard to this Sunday law movement, and we'll talk about this quite extensively next week. I think that it would be best if in our papers the subject of the perpetuity of the law of God were made a specialty. We should now be doing our very best to defeat this Sunday law. So in light of the inspired counsel, each of us must make up our own mind after individual consideration of the issues of our relationship as well as our role with the government. It must be done in the light of our own study of inspiration, in view of our regard of public affairs, must be molded by biblical principles and understanding of prophecy. It is clear that with regard to voting, my friends, it is appropriate for us to exercise the duties in regard to voting only as we have been disciplined to understand the bearing of the important questions. And as previously stated, we should never vote for a particular person or candidate on their looks, their personality, charisma, race, gender, or religion. You know, they're trying to do that with, what's her name? Amy Coney Barrett. She's a Roman Catholic, you know that? And people are condemning her because she's a Roman Catholic. You cannot judge a person by their religion. That's not only against our Constitution, it's against the principles of heaven. And what they don't understand is one of the presidential candidates is himself a Roman Catholic, but it doesn't seem to make a difference when it comes to him. You see how two-sided it is. One Catholic is very liberal, one is conservative, and so because she's conservative, she's Catholic. Study the issues for yourself. Historically, my friends, 2 very significant events were taking place in 1888. One was in the realm of religion and biblical truth, and the other in the arena of politics, which would impact religious freedom. One was what the Lord's messenger referred to as a most precious message sent to his church through Christ's delegated messengers. We were told that The message given us by A.T. Jones and E.J. Wagner was the message of God to the Laodicean church. We have all of this documented. The message of Christ's righteousness was to sound from one end of the earth to the other to prepare the way of the Lord. This is the glory of God, which was to close the work of the three angels. And this was the beginning of the loud cry of the third angel. It is sad to say that when God sent this most precious message to us to prepare the way for the Lord and close the work of the third angel, that message was despised, and the light was resisted, and the spatial power of the Holy Spirit that was to carry the work to a conclusion as it did on Pentecost was kept from us. The other notable event in 1888 was the Blair Bill battle going on in the United States Senate. The bill was pressing for a national Sunday law in this nation. And God was once again using A.T. Jones as he appeared before the U.S. government in opposition to this unconstitutional endeavor. There's two documents that you can access there. A.T. Jones' presentation before the United States Senate is at this website here. And you can also actually download the Blair Sunday bill at this website. And if you don't have that, you let me know. If you don't have time to write it down, I don't know if I put it in the bulletin. But anyway, I can send you these links. I would have printed them out for you, but one of them is 137 pages itself. And I did print out the first 2 pages of Jones' thing. It's amazing. You need to really read it, and it costs you nothing to go online and look at it, of what was taking place at that point in time. These events were developing, my friends, at the very time that God sent a message to prepare the way for the Lord and to close the work of the third angel and begin the loud cry of the fourth angel. But because the church despised the men and the message they bore, and by rejecting the message given in Minneapolis, they committed sin, God could not accomplish his desire for Jesus to come. And consequently, we were not prepared for the national Sunday law. If we had been prepared, it could have come back then. Again, it must be stressed that Seventh-day Adventists must not, as we bring this to an end, must not link themselves or their church with any political party. God employs the strongest figures to show that there should be no union between worldly parties and those who are seeking the righteousness of Christ. We are not to be engaged in partisan strife. We have no battles to fight in the political world, but we have received many strong warnings about being involved in these political issues, and this is what I want to kind of bring it down to. Whatever the opinions you may entertain in regard to casting your vote in political questions, you are not to proclaim it by pen or voice. Our people need to be silent upon questions which have no relation to the third angel's message. Now, pause here just a minute. Remember, she was saying you need to go out and vote against temperance. What is that relation to third angel's message? We must better understand what the third angel's message is, because if it is righteousness by faith in verity, then there's depths of this that we don't understand. We are not as a people to become mixed up with political questions. While we are in no wise to become involved in political questions, it is our privilege to take a stand decidedly on all questions relating to temperance reform. Concerning this, I have often borne a plain testimony. So there is a difference between political questions and moral, ethical, biblical principles. And I want to leave you with this thought. Here's some political issues that we're facing: foreign policy, Social Security, trade, business and labor, gun control, minimum wage, health care, taxes, immigration. These are all political issues. And if you have feelings toward those, feel free to do it, but don't try to press that upon other people. Okay? But you become convicted yourself. But on the other hand, aside from the political issues, there's the biblical, moral, ethical issues that we face. God's law, religious freedom, Sunday legislation, temperance, which today includes drugs and alcohol and all of that stuff, the sanctity of marriage, immorality, and the right to life. And it's on this point now that we'll pick our study up the next time. That little sheet that you got, just look it over and develop some thoughts on where we're at and what direction we as a people and we as a nation are headed.